So my guest today is Patrick Campbell. So Patrick is the founder of ProfitWell. ProfitWell is a business intelligence platform helping more than 8,000 subscription companies reduce churn, optimize their pricing, and grow their subscription business end to end. Patrick is an economist by training. Before starting his company in 2012, he worked in data and strategy at Google and Gemvara in Boston. Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, awesome to be here. Talk about research, all kinds of fun stuff today. Excited.
Yeah. So ProfitWell is a really interesting story. It started out bootstrap, providing services, helping businesses with their pricing strategies. But the vision was always to be a product company, from what I understood. So how were you going about figuring out what the product should be initially?
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest misconceptions about our company, and it's kind of our fault if it's a misconception, right? And so we actually ended up starting off as a pure product company. So we had this piece of software that we started off with that did essentially pricing research. So you build these surveys and you send it out. And then what we discovered is basically people, they like the data and they like the output. They didn't want to do the work to get the output, and they didn't want to. How do I put it? They didn't want to make decisions without talking to a human. So they wanted like services and things like that on top of it. And we were like, oh, that's dumb. Like, we don't want to do that. And then it was like, well, no, we'll pay you money. And we're like, oh, okay. So it was one of those things that kind of, worked out in a good way. And then, we when we were doing our research, we wanted a better way to get data than just surveys. And so we started building other products and things like that. And that's what came about with ProfitWell Metrics. And now we have a whole suite of products out there.
So at what point did you guys start thinking about adding multiple products? Like, was it what made you think that this was the right strategy?
So, yeah, it's a good question. I think it really just came down to the math and just the velocity. So what I mean by that is we realized very quickly that our TAM, our total addressable market from a logo perspective was actually quite small. There's only, depending on how you measure it, about 150,000, maybe only 100,000 subscription companies. And when you cut that by SaaS, mainly the B2B SaaS market, then all of a sudden you're talking about 20 to 30,000 companies, which is not a lot from a market perspective. And so, the advantage of that market is the revenue on all these businesses is growing exponentially, right? It's compounding as the world of subscriptions and recurring revenue does, which is our market. And so we looked at it and we said, okay, well, to be a $100 million company, $1 billion company, we can't sell $50 a month products, to a lot of people, right? We have to sell like higher priced. So we needed high LTV, and the best way to get a high LTV is through good pricing and good monetization, as well as good retention, obviously. But then, the way that you increase that ARPU or that or ACV even further, the average revenue per user, or the average or the contract value, is basically by adding more products, right? And so it kind of created this thesis of being multi-product, and we've taken this on really early in our life cycle. Most companies don't take this on until they're a $100 million company, and we're a $10 million company. So it's kind of fascinating.
But so how did the opportunities for ProfitWell Metrics, Retain, and Recognize come about? Like, how much effort did you guys put into finding the next product opportunity?
Say that one more time. You cut out just a little bit there.
So how did the opportunities for ProfitWell Metrics, Retain, and Recognize come about? Like, how did you guys stumble on these opportunities specifically?
Yeah. So the metrics product, actually, so like I kind of said before, we were looking for a product that we could. So survey data is amazing. A lot of people misunderstand survey data. They don't know like how to clean data properly, and like we're terrible as human beings or as operators at sending surveys. But the people who are really good at it, and they realize like how much power is there. The issue that we were having is it's a higher cost way to get data, and so we were thinking, well, there were two things. Like, one, we were thinking, well, how do we get the data we need at a lower cost? And what that became was, well, what if we had access to their financial or their financial data, or what if we created personas? And I was like, well, then we would need financial data, probably top of the funnel data, engagement data. Ooh, all of a sudden that's starting to become, really, really, really complicated, right? And then it's like, okay, well, how do we get that data in a better way? Well, we're always going to have to start with financial metrics, right? So that was kind of a little bit of a thesis that we were having. And then all of a sudden we were helping a company that was about to IPO with their pricing. And we discovered that they were basically calculating MRR and churn completely incorrectly. Like it was a company that was about to be public. And so we kind of started putting two together and we were like, oh, well, we have multiple things that are showing us like that this is something that we should go into. And that's when we jumped into ProfitWell metrics. And then everything else was like very much like the flow of information and the flow of like resistance, right? Which was like, oh, like, yeah, this is not good. Let's solve it. Or, hey, we're right next to being able to solve this. Let's do that. Or this is what, our customers are screaming, all types of things.
So one opportunity came out of the previous and then the previous, and then it was a sequence of different opportunities that came out from the previous.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And how much effort do you guys put into finding what the next opportunity or next product opportunity should be?
I'll say,
like how much effort do you guys put into figuring out what the next opportunity should be for a new product?
So yeah, that's a really great question. It's really hard to quantify effort, right? If it was physics, it'd be a lot easier, right? So I think it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to quantify just because like, you're always like rationalizing why you're doing things, right? And so you're like, well, of course we put a lot of effort into it because we just rationalize why we're doing it. And it's like, well, hold on a second. No, maybe we didn't put that much work into it. So I think for us, it's like the effort, the flow starts with a thesis, right? And it's like, hey, I have this thesis, and that thesis is probably based on something that someone said, or like some feedback that we got, or someone we really trust, like being like, oh, you guys should totally do this, or something like that. And then what ends up happening is our CPO, our head of product, and we then just start debating. We're like, oh, we should do this, or we shouldn't do this, or we shouldn't do that, right? And so there's a lot of effort that actually goes there, and it's very much qualitative. And yes, there's some quantitative aspects that we go through, like with this of like, hey, well, why would we go into that space? Well, let's look at the size of the space. Well, this, these 3 articles say the size of the space is this, like that makes sense, or that handles that objection. So there's a lot of debate that goes on. And I think that a lot of companies, this is where they like should start, but they don't, because it's uncomfortable to debate. And we've created a pretty big, culture of debate and feedback. Then what we end up doing is, let's say we're like, cool, we're going to go after it. Then we write a narrative, which is basically like a memo of sorts, where we just go through, like X, Y, and Z of like, this is the logic behind it. And then what we end up doing is, if the logic makes sense and we send it to like another group of people internally, we then go and we then start doing market research. Now, this market research will probably start with just qualitative interviews. Hey, how are you doing this right now? What does this look like? Kind of like being a prosecuting attorney. Like, you're not asking them directly, do you want this, right? And I think that's another problem, is people don't do the narrative, they don't do the debating, and then they just go out and be like, hey, do you want this? And then what you're doing is you're just doing the path of least resistance, which is, well, I'm just going to build the thing that someone says. And it's like, yeah, but there might be one person, they might not be articulating things properly. Like, you have to be that, that researcher to basically dig into it. And then after those conversations, we'll start to have like a clear thesis on like some of the details of what we're doing. And then we'll do some quantitative research, which is, sending out some surveys to our customer base, and then like disregarding certain people's answers if they're, hey, we know this isn't going to be a startup product. This is for big dogs. So we have to like get big dog, data and things like that. And then, what ends up happening is, and then there's this iteration cycle, right? So we've decided on this big thing that we're going to go after. And now there's just constant iterations, and those iterations have their own research cycles and their own debates and things like that. So like right now for our Retain product, which is a churn reduction product, we did those big debates and the big narrative like years ago at this point. Now it's like, hey, should we go into this part of the market, or should we add this feature? And so those cycles are shorter because the overarching thesis has been thought through, and now it's just more detail work, even if it's a big feature or something like that. So hopefully that's helpful. I mean, that's kind of the process that we follow, and it probably isn't as linear as I'm saying. It's probably all over the place, and in some cases, as is the case when you're building something.
No, it's great. So is there like an overarching persona or like a profile that you're specifically targeting across these opportunities? Like, is there like a unifying thread behind these opportunities in terms of the targeting or the market that you guys are going after? Like you mentioned SaaS for
Yeah.
sure, but like within SaaS
Well,
itself.
yeah, so we go after we're subscriptions targeting. So that's not just SaaS.
Yeah.
It's D2C or direct to consumer, which includes subscription e-commerce, subscription media, subscription nonprofits, all kinds of stuff. And so I think that the big thing to kind of think through for us has been um, multiple products means you typically will have multiple personas, but maybe the same company you're targeting. So this has made it complicated. And we admittedly have not figured out all of this from a go-to-market perspective or even a product perspective, because you can't just spin up 4 teams for 4 products, right? Like this is just not how it should work, especially when we're a bootstrapped or a customer funded company of about 80 folks. And we have like 4 different products, right? So like that's a lot to like, a lot of surface area. And so you have to, you're probably going to deprioritize a product on some level. And then you have to come up with some framework of your targeting. Now, from a go-to-market perspective, they're all subscription companies, and we tend to target companies that are doing tens of millions, if not more, of revenue.
Yeah.
But we get a lot because we have a free product. We get a ton of startups, and we love them, and we like them, and they like us. They're getting a ton of value. But because of that LTV problem that I was describing, like we need to go after like more upmarket companies. And then each product has different personas. So on the Price Intelligently product, that typically is targeting marketing and product folks. And normally the head of product or the head of marketing, unless it's like $100 million plus company, then it might be like a director of some sort. Retained product is customer success or product. And then our recognized product is very, very much the CFO or there's not really chief accounting officers, but a lead accountant at a company. And so, it's kind of interesting too, because we use the free product as basically a signal. So depending on who comes in, because it might be the founder. Well, if it's a founder at a smaller company, we'll go at them with a certain product, right? Probably retain. If it's a founder at a larger company, we'll probably like do an enterprise type deal where we try to sell them a suite. But if it's customer success or CFO or something like that, we'll lead with like those different products, mainly because those are the ones that they're most interested in.
So in a way, the free product helps qualify a certain set of prospects, and then the behavior within the free product will help, or the people that sign up will help you qualify what the next step should be.
Yeah, 100%. So basically the idea, and that sounds really elegant and smooth. It's not that elegant and smooth. So it's just one of those things that it's like, there needs to be a lot of adjustments depending on how things go forward.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where, it's at least like, those are the, not only the constraints, but those are the playing field or the framework that we're working with, which, allows our team to kind of work within it.
So you mentioned before, like that a lot of times businesses will start thinking about multi-product strategy later on. You guys did it a bit earlier. So when do you think is the right time to start thinking about that specifically? Like you guys did it earlier. There's specific reasons for that. But when do you think for other business, when should they start thinking about expanding their product line?
So when do we start thinking about expanding it?
When should a business start thinking about that? Like what are the
got it
criterion, I guess?
As late as humanly possible. No,
okay.
Just because of our pain. No, I think that it's a good question. I think the mental model there is more around, like if you were seeing like crazy traction on one product, like I think you need predictable growth for one product before you move on to the next product. And that's the thing where you have infinite optionality. And so what's really, and this is the classic product advice, is, hey, you need to say no more often than you say yes, right? And so much more, like 99 no's to 1 yes, right? And I think what ends up happening is, we can even get a little bit too like, oh yeah, we could build that because we have, 20% of the entire subscription market using ProfitWell. And so it's one of those things where it's like, well, you have 20% of any market. There's just infinite possibilities of what you could build to monetize that market, right? And so I think for most folks, it's you got to have predictable growth in one area, and then the market's going to pull you. And I know that feels like fluffy, but the market's going to pull you into a direction of like, hey, this is what makes sense, or this is not what makes sense. And I think that that's kind of the structure of how to like, think through things. And, your measurement of the market pulling you is going to be, is going to be different depending on the vertical in the company.
So when you guys start looking into like a new opportunity, how do you start thinking about pricing when it comes to the new products? Like from what I understood, they have the different products you have different value metrics and different not business models, but different ways of charging specifically. Like when you guys start thinking about it? Like how do you guys start thinking about the pricing?
Yeah. So our directive is, so we basically have this spectrum, and this spectrum came about in just thinking through like the analytics space. So there's a spectrum of data, analytics, insights, outcomes, right? So the only reason you want data is to solve an outcome. The only reason you want analytics is to help you solve an outcome. The only reason you want insights is to help solve an outcome, right? So everything leads to this outcome, and it could be reducing churn, improving ARPU. It could be a whole host of things, right? And so our thesis was, okay, anything that's just data or analytics, we're probably going to not charge for, right? Like that's where we're going to have freemium. Anything that's insights or outcomes, we're going to be driving towards an outcome. The only reason we have those insights is to get towards the outcome, but we're going to try to charge based on the outcome as close as humanly possible. And so what's kind of held us back from building certain products has been, there's no effective way to charge based on an outcome. So for example, like, we want to come up with this, there's certain retention aspects or retention products that we wanted to build, and we're probably going to build them, but we're going to include them basically in the retained product rather than spinning them into something else, because it's like, hey, we can't charge in a clean way that isn't tied towards that outcome. But if we put it into retain, we can still charge based on that outcome. And yeah, maybe we're not like monetizing that feature as effectively as we could, but we're monetizing the entire product. And so our price intelligently product, like that's morphing into like a pure software product or a lighter service product, at some point in the next couple of years, because we now have a clean thesis on, hey, this is how we could charge based on outcome, for a pricing product, right? And so that's what really, really drives us. And I think that when you have some initial traction and you're moving, this is how you should think about your pricing or your products. Like, hey, is there a way that I can charge effectively to increase my overall ACV or ARPU? I think this is the reason why we gave away ProfitWell for free. The metrics product was one, because metrics products are terribly difficult to monetize. They all go up market. They all start out saying, hey, we're going to be like the democratization of this type of metric. And it's like, nope, we're going to Fortune 500, because people just don't appreciate metrics and analytics products as much as they should. And, we've tried to change that, but it doesn't work. That's just how people are hard coded. And so it's a gateway for us. And the only reason it's a gateway is because from a unit economic perspective, as well as from a network effect perspective, not only for a network effect of the data feeding our algorithms, but also the network effect of people like referring other people to use the product, that just kind of worked out, right? And so I think that's been the big thing that we've kind of focused on, is like, how do we charge for products that, basically make people more money? And that's like the central thesis.
So each of your products, the products that you're charging for, have a specific outcomes that people are buying for. So like like retain, for example, is churn reduction, and all the other products. So the way you kind of segment these products as well is based on the actual outcome that's coming out of the products.
Yeah, that's the goal. Now, we are not in a perfect place because we have some pricing debt, we'll call it. So okay. Ironically, our price intelligently product, the way that it's set up, we can't charge purely based on outcome. Now we have a plan, like we have this ROI plan that people can pay for, but what ends up happening is like it gets really complicated when you're selling to an enterprise company, right? We're selling to like a giant, Autodesk or something like that. Like they need a little bit more predictability, and they can't handle the ambiguity of, the type of pricing that we would come up with. Now we're working on basically a new product coming down the pipe where we would be able to do that. Now that's going to be some time though. But we have this debt where it's like not a perfect thesis yet, but it's something that we are basically guiding ourselves towards.
Okay. So once you have like these products, How do you figure out what the value metric should be for these like it's tied to the outcome, I assume?
For the new products?
Yeah, either for the new products or the products that you had and you created in the past.
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do. So all new products, we're trying to get as close to outcome as possible. Now, some of them might still be in the insights like world, which isn't necessarily. So that's where price intelligently is. Like, hey, we've done this research. We have these insights, we have this data, or these insights that tell you that you should do X, and that's what's going to help you improve that ARPU or that ACV, right? So it's basically like 1 degree away from that outcome, or I guess 1 degree, 2 degree. I don't know how the degree system really works, but it's like basically right next to that outcome. So we're okay with that for now, but basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to get all of our products into a world of outcomes, which might not be possible like right now, but it will be possible as we kind of advance in the future.
Okay. So when you're working on say the pricing model for Retain or another product, like how do you go about creating the segmentation for your pricing strategy?
So for us, like which axis of segmentation are you referring to? I just want to make sure I understand.
I think that's part of the question. So how do you figure out like which axis of segmentation are important for a specific product versus another one?
Got it. So when you're referring to segmentation, are you referring to like verticals, those types of things, or like types of personas? I just want to make sure I understand, because there's segmentation I can take that way, or packaging segmentation.
I think that's also the question is like which dimensions are you looking at specifically, and like how do you figure out which dimensions matter for that specific product?
Yeah. So okay. I'm going to answer based on my interpretation of segmentation. Yeah, because segmentation gets tough because most people, when they refer to it, is like, which aspect of the customer or the segment of the base that you have. So for us, it's when we're doing research and we're putting together our pricing specifically for most of our products, we just go back to those ideal customer profiles that we've set out, and we really focus on like the data and the information that's coming from those target folks. So for example, on the pricing side, we will weight data, or we will weight information for customers that come from those companies that are doing 75 million or more in revenue per year versus those who are doing less than that, right? Because we're pushing ourselves to like continue to go up market. Now, in terms of like, the segmentation of when a deal comes in, we typically price also along that axis on some level. So we have a couple of different levers within our price intelligently pricing. One is like the size of the company, and that's very much like, pure segmentation based, where it's like, hey, if they're above this threshold, the price is different than it's below this threshold. And that's basically just because the value that they're getting, even if it's the same level of work, is very different, right? If I improve, ARPU for $100 million company by 30%, and I improve a startup by 30%, that $100 million company is going to see those gains in a much, much quicker way, and also a much more dramatic way. So that's kind of how we weight things there. What's kind of beautiful with the Retain product is the segmentation is just built into the value metric. So we charge based on recovered revenue. So if you're a large company, you have a lot of failed payments, and the price is then going to be higher because it's recovered revenue, versus a smaller company where you might have a lot of failed payments. And so the effective percentage we take based on revenue, and we don't charge based on percentage. We charge based on, we have some tiers that basically backs into based on how much we recover. But either way, like that allows us to, basically get as close to pure value as humanly possible. And yeah, we're pretty proud of, the elegance of that pricing model, because it's pure ROI. If they don't make any money, it's $0. Doesn't cost you anything. And if we make you a ton of money, we take, a good amount of money, but it's nowhere near the amount of money we made you.
But so in that sense, like, so the segmentation that you guys have is based on, so you have an overarching hierarchy of the market that you guys are looking at, and the products matter to different types of audience, different types of segments that you guys have, different ideal customer profiles within in relation to that specifically.
Yeah. So from that perspective, yeah, exactly. So we have, depending on the product, we have different segments that we target, and then our pricing model shifts depending on who actually comes in, right? So, on our inbound side, on the lead to demo or our ops team, so they're not BDRs. We don't have BDRs, but they're like BDR equivalents. They are only taking they're only going after folks outbound who are of a certain size or of a certain caliber, but they'll take inbound from different types of groups as well. So it's structured based on those segments coming in, but that's the nature of a value metric, is that it can kind of save you a little bit from having to overthink segmentation.
Okay. So in that sense, that also helps you guys minimize a little bit the diffuseness of having multiple products, where you guys are targeting the same profiles, but approaching them with a set of products that cater to their realities.
Yeah, it gets tough. It just gets tough because, like, again, there's a lot of surface area, but yeah, the long and short of it is we are trying to make somewhat of the path of least resistance for folks coming in. And we don't want to, obviously get it wrong when they come in, just because they might not, we don't want to confuse the sales process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's actually a very good strategy. Like I don't know if you've read Lost and Founder by Rand Fishkin.
Yeah, Rand.
Yeah. Well, so he talks about how the multi-product strategy that they had actually confused because they had different personas, different targets, and the products didn't overlap that much. I think you guys have a structure that kind of makes it more consistent, which is really interesting.
Yeah, which works out well. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's just super hard whenever you add multiple pieces to a situation, and that's kind of what we've done.
What do you feel are the pros and the cons of having like a multiple product strategy?
Cons we've talked a lot about, so I'll summarize them. I mean, it's you got a lot more surface area for limited resources, right? And there's definitely an argument not to do it, because you have, again, if we were targeting different types of like companies, and different types of buyers, like I think it would be a very dumb decision. And maybe it's still a dumb decision, but we've convinced ourselves it's a smart decision, because we're going after the same companies, and we have this like hub and spoke model where they can come in through the hub, which is ProfitWell metrics, or they can come in from one of the spokes, which is our different paid products. Now, what's super interesting is on the pro side, we get multiple bites at the apple, as they say, or I might be using the metaphor incorrectly, where let's say someone stalls on the retain side of the house, right? The customer success person, they're really busy, or he or she just like is interested for some reason. We can go at them for the price intelligently product, right? And that customer success person may or may not even be involved in that process, right? And so there's a little bit of a swarming aspect where when one path fails, another path can be successful, over time. I think that the other pro is that and this might be just rationalization of a bad idea, but we don't have to necessarily be as targeted with some of our marketing strategies, because there's a little bit of a pick your own adventure, because people can kind of come in and see what's going on. But the con there is that, our homepage is a little generic, right? It's a little bit hard to understand exactly like what we do from the hero, right? It's not just like, we do this, we help with this, right? It's like, we have a suite of products that help with this nebulous thing, right? This outcome-centered products, right? And it's like, what does that mean? Well, you have to read a little bit more to understand, right? And so the goal is we have to be so good at our marketing and so good at our content that people are willing to read that whole page, right? If they can read the whole page, we can get them. If they don't read the whole page, then it's really complicated, right? So I think that there's, those are some of the pros, some of the cons. I think it's, it's something that we're like literally every quarter, we're like on some level debating, like, how should we focus all on this thing right now? Should we do this? And we always kind of talk our way out of it. But yeah, it's something that's super interesting.
So how would you assess a product that would be too far off the platform that you guys have created? Like, would you say, for example, a product that is for acquisition or something else like that? Is there like something that would tell you that this is too far off, or what we currently have?
Yeah, I think that it really comes down to, so it's less about the space. So we believe that we will, we'll have an acquisition product at some point. And it's more about what is it that we can do that no one else can do better?
Okay.
Right? Or what makes us unique in doing it? So one thing that we thought about is like, oh, let's build an NPS product, because it'd be really useful to have NPS inside ProfitWell. So you can segment your data by NPS. But then we're like, like, what are we going to do that's anything different than every other NPS product that's out there? And we have some ideas of how we could do this in a unique way, because, the Price Intelligently software is survey based. And so there's some things we've learned there. But we're probably not going to make like a 4 to 5x, let alone a 10x product in that space, right? So it's like, let's just integrate with people, and people can use whatever they're using right now. And then, maybe we offer up a version of it because a really basic product there. But it probably doesn't make sense for us to build that, right? So it really kind of comes down to like that uniqueness factor. Like, what can we do that someone else can't? Well, right now with Retain, our data set allows us to basically be the best in the world at recovering failed payments, because we're sitting on more failed payment data than anyone else, right? And data is, is the fuel for those algorithms. Now, that is kind of expanding now into active churn as well. Like, we're not going to be a gain site. We're not going to be anything like that, but we might be like a product complement to the gain sites of the world and those types of things. So I think long story short, it really comes down to, that thesis of how are we better than, how can we be better than anyone else who would be building this? And that's, it's not always obvious. And so there's definitely debate that goes into that.
So in a way, it's kind of looking at what your current platform enables, find a way where you could expand in the most strategically sound way to be able to address in a unique way other outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're going, so for give you an example, so like we're going deeper and deeper into revenue operations, which is this newfangled term, which is basically the combination of sales, marketing, and customer success operations under one roof. And what we're finding is that, we thought the cleaning of data and getting accurate financial data was going to be, something that, is hard, but everyone was going to be able to do. Well, it turns out like we've been in this game now for like 6 years, and we're still miles ahead of our competition and other people in terms of like accuracy. And so it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, like maybe this is a lot harder than we thought. And so, as we go deeper into revenue operations, it's like, okay, well, we can create products that help with revenue operations that are like, we're uniquely qualified to solve around, accurate data and things like that. And so that's kind of how we think about it. I think that there's a world where you still have to say no to some of those ideas, but right now that's the guiding light for a lot of the ideas that we have, because a lot of the ideas we have, it's all of a sudden like we ask that question and then poof, that idea goes away because we're like, there's nothing that we can do, that is going to solve for this.
No, it's definitely a super interesting approach. I like, in a way, how contrarian it is to a lot of the thinking in startups right now. How would you, maybe last question, like how would you, if you were starting over today, like how would you approach figuring out what your opportunity should be?
Say that one more time.
Like if you were starting all over today, like you were able to start any kind of business in the current space, like how would you go about figuring out what your opportunity is?
Yeah. So what
from
the
scratch.
approach is?
Yeah,
from scratch.
Sorry for the challenging question. Yeah.
No, it's hard. You ask really good questions because they're not obvious answers. I think that here's what I think on approach. I feel as if most companies, they do this a little bit backwards. Product market fit was a really good concept when product was really difficult to build. Now, creating a great product is still and always will be really difficult because it's like creating a great piece of art or a great, math theorem or like a great, chemistry innovation or something like that. Like it's always going to be hard to do great. But I think the barrier to entry is so low right now where all of us can just basically build a product, very quickly, right? We can spin up a server and all those things that we take for granted of being able to just grab a website off of Squarespace or doing XYZ. Like those things were so hard 20 years ago. Like it took so much effort and so much money to like do those things. And I think so Now, like product market fit made sense because, hey, if you could build this innovation, there weren't a lot of features and like functionality out there. So you could just go find this market, right? You have the product. Now I got to go find the market. And I think that really we're in a world of market, right? And so like Balfour, Brian Balfour, a good friend of mine who's, runs Reforge right now, and used to be former growth or leader of growth over at HubSpot. He basically, started, talking about like, it's really market product fit. Like, what is the market you're going to go into? And then gleaning from that market, what makes the most sense to build for that market, right? And I think that what you need to do in terms of approach, if we were starting over, I would think about the market, and then there's a bunch of questions, right? Well, if the market's so astronomically big, there's probably people in it already. So what makes you different? If the market's small but growing, what's the thing that can make you unique now, but also helps you ride the wave of the market? And just really going deep on what that market is, and then kind of thinking through like what you build. And so I really like what David Cancel did at Drift, where the first year and a half, 2 years, they built like 4 or 5 different products to chase like different markets. And it was all in the name of research. And then they said, oh, this is the space we're in. We're going into this space. And then they went all in, right? And so it's less of, I think right now, I guess to put it in more practical terms, there's too many people going, oh, cool, I can create this cool thing. And then they go all in on this cool thing they just created. Not enough people who are like, hey, let me research this cool market. And then based on that, I'm going to go all in on it. And it's just because like research isn't as sexy as like pushing code, right? The problem is that research helps you understand what code you should push. And not enough people realize that.
But in that case, like, how would you define that market?
Which one? Drift or
well,
just in general?
Well, yeah, maybe Drift is an example of that, but like it, because the market could be like, for example, like pharmaceuticals, or it could be like a segment within that market. Like, how would you start with the market?
That's a whole podcast. That's a whole book probably, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, how do you define that market? I mean, that's where you have to go into research mode, right? And again, it's going to start with an inkling of an idea, right? Or it might start with like, I mean, I know some people who build their companies based on, what are the top 10 largest markets, or what are the top 10 growing markets, right? So the classic Amazon, hey, like retail's interesting, but this internet thing, like it wasn't an e-commerce play, it was an internet play. He's like, oh, the internet's going nuts. Like there's going to be an e-commerce person or a commerce retail person who wins in that market, right? So you're looking at trends, but you're also looking at, those inklings that you might have, and then kind of like sanding down. And then it comes down to a combination of, all kinds of stuff, right? Like there's some folks, and I think I'm one of them. Like I can fall in love with any market, right? I can fall in love with every single market that's out there. I could be making shower curtains, right? And I would know everything about shower curtains. I could tell you everything about it. But then I think that there's a ton of people who are more, they're more like, well, I need to love it, or I need to like it, right? And that's a constraint. And that doesn't mean you can't find a big market. You just might have to like, find a little bit of a more unique play on it, if that makes sense.
That's really interesting. Thanks for taking the time, Patrick. Where can people go to learn more about your work and your company?
So I'm just ProfitWell.com is, we write a ton of content, do a bunch of other fun stuff. And then, I'm just Patrick Campbell on LinkedIn. So find me there. That's where I publish a lot of fun stuff. But if you ever have any other questions, feel free to email me at patrick@ProfitWell.com. Sometimes it takes a little bit for me to get back to you, but I always will get back to you.
Amazing. Thank you very much.